take that to the commuter master plan. This is basically an output that we had in the Simba project with the original intention of kind of filling a gap in policy documents that was missing. The policy document that has a focus on intermodal travel as well as commuting within a functional urban area. And so the motivation for putting together this, I just want to make sure that we move to the next slide. It doesn't seem to be working. There. Okay, so our motivation here, we look at the situation today with commuting.
Yes, Colin? Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah?
Good, yeah.
Is it working now?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So on average, we're traveling a lot further to get to our workplace, to and from our workplace. And this oftentimes takes us through different cities and regions. The cities are drawing people in for work, but then affordable housing is maybe drawing people out to suburbs and maybe more rural areas. And so this idea of cross-border commuting is becoming more and more common. And there's complexities around that with administrative boundaries, different responsibilities between different administrations, as well as different priorities among different administrations. So you could have the missing connections for public transit. You could have a lacking communication between municipalities, for example. And different priorities, they could be maybe the municipality, they prioritize sustainable mobility, but you have a national transportation administration that maybe prioritizes car travel instead. So there's a bit of a conflict there. We also recognize that in a number of cities, maybe in particular smaller cities, that there are gaps in data and knowledge, so that we don't necessarily have a clear indication of how our transport system is working. But having said that, there are new developments in mobility and IT, sharing resources and that kind of thing. We're sharing bicycles, we're sharing e-scooters now, we're sharing car trips even. We're finding new ways to purchase tickets, or maybe we're not even purchasing tickets, but we have a mobile phone app that recognizes us when we get on a train or a bus. So there's a lot of interesting new developments and a lot of interesting possibilities coming up. But we kind of summarize the whole idea that many urban areas face the challenges that we basically can't tackle this problem alone. We need teamwork. We need to work together with our neighboring. We need to work together with the regions and transit organizations. We need to bring the politicians in, and especially the public as well. We need to bring them in early in the stages. And this is basically to address this challenge that we, in a lot of cases, that the car is dominating our streets and even our spatial planning. So commuter master plan, what is it? Policy document that guides the development of daily mobility in an urban region, the whole functional urban area, regardless of administrative or organizational borders. To sum it up, it's basically a document that helps the planners to work around the complexities involved with working with this kind of functional area, as well as working around the complexities, working with different actors, different stakeholders with intermodal travel. We give out a number of different cases and a number of different solutions. We hope to inspire some new ideas. It could be like a social media influencer, but in a PDF form. So within the commuting master plan, we have a focus on intermodal travel. As Kay mentioned, that this is basically combining multiple modes of transport in a single journey. It could be taking the bike to the train station. It could even be the last few hundred meters. If you were to take the car into the city and then walk the remaining 100 meters. It also has a focus on evidence-based planning. So this is when we bring in the data, the surveys, the car counts, the bicycle counts, observational studies on how people use public space. These are the examples that help us to understand how the transport system is working today. And of course, participatory process, this is very important, but it's sometimes underestimated. In the document here, we basically have an overview, of course, of why it's important. That it's generally good to have a plan to know who to include from the beginning, how to include them, and when in the process. We have a number of references in there. There's been a number of projects that have specialized in these types of participatory processes. So there's nothing groundbreaking here, but certainly a reminder of how it can be integrated in the CMP process. And then basically we have a policy template with the intention of it can function as a standalone document, but we see it that it maybe functions better as a complementing format that anchors in via another policy. So it could be sort of a nationally accepted guidelines in your country, or it could be EU guidelines such as SUMP or CCAP that seem to be quite popular according to the Menti survey. And of course, we have very convenient inputs from the other outputs of our project, such as the benchmarking scheme, the intermodalizer, as well as our very useful guidelines on transport planning as well that feed into there. And all of these documents can be found on the project website, sumba.eu. Going through quickly some of the key aspects, of course, governance and urban mobility planning. Your functional urban area, again, is made up of several municipalities. There's maybe poor connections and communication between them. We're looking at developing indicators and capacity for analyzing the transport system with our counts and our survey data. This helps us to follow the trends and the changes in the system and to validate our measures and see how they're functioning. Of course, the infrastructure, filling those gaps and missing links, especially at the borders between municipalities, for example. At the end of the day, people are not going to take a bike to the bus stop if there's no bicycle infrastructure and they're worried about getting hit by a car. Fare schemes and integrated public transport systems, common ticketing, mobility as a service, and then, of course, developing new mobility services and integrating these together. That's when we start getting into the share systems. And so these aspects are brought up in the CMP. And I'll just go really quickly here through the template for policy document. It functions kind of as like an order of operations that we go through. It's good to have a strategic goal or vision that's shared, not only by the municipality, but also by the other actors in your region or your urban area. Your action plan is where you define your measures and how you plan to implement them. And then there needs to be some documentation about how they're taken into strategies and plans or policy through a SUMP, for example. And then, of course, monitoring and updating is very important to be sure that your CMP or your planning document is not just left on a shelf collecting dust somewhere. I think it's really interesting to look at how the CMP is used in the different cities that are involved in the SUMBA project. We take Altona, a borough in Hamburg, for example, where we have a number of different challenges. Remember this street picture here, because we'll come back to it later or in a second. Here we have a problem where strategic transport planning does not occur at the borough level. It's difficult to implement measures on arterial roads and the rail, but that the borough actually functions more as an important stakeholder in the process. In Altona, there's a high volumes of through traffic leading into Hamburg, as well as into Altona, but it's basically affecting space allocation and pollution. I think in Hamburg, the city, there's about 2 streets that have restrictions on cars, like diesel vehicles, and both of these are located in Altona. So we know that there's quite a problem there. And of course, everything is at capacity during rush hour traffic. The roads are at capacity, public transit is at capacity. So it's quite a big challenge, and we need to help them to make the system more effective. Looking at their functional urban area, they have kind of a funny shape to theirs. It's kind of a wedge shape, and what they're doing here is focusing on a commuting corridor that impacts their city or the borough. And then look at commuting from Pinneberg into Altona, and also the traffic that maybe continues into kind of the more central area of Hamburg. In their process, they were working, among others, the representatives from Pinneberg, as well as 3 transit operators of the 25 that are operating in Hamburg total, as well as the National Transport Ministry. And so look at some of the ways that they're applying the SUMBA project. This continuous participation with these working groups. An interesting output from this, for example, that came up recently was this, maybe hard to see in the map here, but this is a 9-kilometer section, kind of a bus route, an important bus route through Altona. that leads towards Pinneberg. And it was raised in one of these working groups, a suggestion that this circle here, this blue circle, is an area where there's a big bottleneck and it's impacting and delaying the buses. And so they brought this idea, well, maybe we should just block it off to cars completely. And I thought that there would be a big argument and this would be very controversial, but actually it was considered to be a very good solution and a good idea. So it's, as I say, it's definitely good to bring people to the table early on in the process, because you never know what you might get as an outcome. But maybe one of the good examples that also comes from Altona is that maybe inspired this proposed pilot, this bus and cycling walking road that I just mentioned, is the test of local measures here. Something that was outside of the Sumba project, but kind of happened at the same time in parallel, was this Otensen Marktplatz. So Otensen, which is a neighborhood, takes space, and they basically closed off a section of this neighborhood to car traffic, and opened it up for people, pedestrians, shoppers, cyclists. And this is the same, if you remember that previous picture with all the car traffic, this is the transformation, and this was the results from the pilot project that happened over a few months. And so in general, the measures and the CMP here for Altona's case is basically anchored by a climate mobility plan for all of Hamburg, as well as a SUMP for the city. Going to a little bit smaller city, Tartu. Here they have a history of walking being kind of the primary mode of transportation, but the car has been taken over. Car traffic has doubled in the last 10 years. Where it has become the main mode of transportation. Cycling remains quite low at about 6 to 8% modal share. And you see how tight you have to ride within the traffic here, so we kind of understand why that is. People are afraid to cycle in the downtown areas and on busy streets. And new housing in suburban areas are increasing commuting and demand to the city center. And then the public transit system is failing to meet the needs and the demands from the commuters. Functional urban area here, city and neighboring villages, population about 125,000. The actors involved with that was, among others, the Tartu Lana Transport, so the transport operator there for Tartu, as well as the National Road Administration. And we have a look there to see that still a lot of people walking, but the car is taking over about 46% there. So applying the Sumba principles that we have, heavy participation again among stakeholders. They started from the beginning to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the system. They ran a number of vision workshops to create a common vision for the transport system and how it should function. And of course, a number of thematic workshops looking at specific measures and things and looking at solutions. They conducted mobility surveys, and one interesting output from that was if you removed all of the barriers, about 36% of people would like to ride a bike to work, would like to commute by bike, which is quite promising and interesting to see. They implemented about 13 counters for cars, for example, measuring the traffic going in and out of the city, as well as non-motorized traffic as well, the movement of people and bicycles. They did some GIS studies, basically, involving the public to get some feedback on locations for bike stations. They have a well-developed bike lending program there, and that they want to expand, as well as to identify a few streets that should be designated quiet streets for low traffic volumes and slower speeds. And their measures are going to be anchored into their CCAP plan that's coming out. And so if we take a peek at their action plan, a Sumba extension project is coming next year in April, where we'll be continuing for about 9 months. And they want to start up a bicycle library. They gained some inspiration from the project in Växjö, and to try and introduce the city more to cargo bikes. They're working more with transit monitoring, as well as real-time signage to show, for example, like next bus. Looking at linked transport hubs. So as I said, expanding their bike lending programs. They're working on rapid cycling network to better connect the train station, as well as the university and the city center. And are looking at extending public transit and bike share to adjacent districts. And looking at our case here at home in Växjö, we have political pressures to maintain good access for cars still. We have now a reduced budget for cycling measures, about a third of what our yearly budget has been previously. We have a little bit of a difference of opinion of what the priorities are between the municipality and Trafikverket, which is our national transport administration, where they tend to prioritize car travel. We in the city and even the municipality, we have a lot of preconditions for higher cycling uptake, which sits about 19% in the municipality, but we have a fairly tight city. You can get most places in definitely under 10 kilometers, mostly under 5 kilometers within the city, but we don't really have real congestion in the city if you compare it to bigger cities. So a lot of people take the car. One way that we tried to interact with the residents in Växjö was that we went out with a study to get feedback on how they felt that the streets should be designed. And we looked at about 4 different city types here by the schools.
Sorry.
Yes?
1 minute to finish, or 2, okay? Okay.
Yep. We gained the feedback. We found that 80% of participants feel that we need to redesign our roads to improve safety. So this means that we maybe have a little bit more courage to implement some of the stronger measures. We also ran this bicycle library where we had over 340 people that were able to borrow a bike. We'll go through this more on Thursday. We have a virtual tour of the bicycle library that I would suggest you attend. We also did a commuting. Basically, we created a GIS-based commuting study, which took the address of where people live and where they work. And so we can identify the key roads as well as we do an accessibility study here. And we found that people in the municipality, about close to 80% have at least 45 or under 45 minutes to get to work. So we see that there's good opportunities there. Applying the Sumbo in Växjö, building the case. As I say, we have our survey, the bicycle library, the commuting study, as well as a traffic model. And going forward with this, we will have an emphasis on strong measures, focusing here on the reallocation of space. We have a decreased budget like a lot of other cities. So we want to make use of the infrastructure that we have and to allocate more space to people, cyclists, and that take the space away from the cars, which is something that Michael brought up in his presentation as well. In our extension, we plan to do a study on the circulation plan and see how we could implement this with inspiration from Ghent and other cities in the Netherlands as well. And we plan to do a sump later on and integrate our CMP into a sump later on. And that's my time is up. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Colin, really, for the nice introduction of the master planning. And I can't agree more on one topic you mentioned, people early on at the table. This could be like the key for all development. So any questions? Any questions? Okay, there is one. What is a good way to combine top-down big data and modeling-driven approach to bottom-up stakeholder engagement approach in preparing CMM sump?
Say it again, combining the top-down big data.
Yeah, to combine top-down big data and modeling-driven approach to bottom-up stakeholder engagement approach.
Yeah, I think that's basically you use these methods to create a picture of how your system is working today. If you work with this big data and modeling, you get an idea of how people are traveling today. And then you can look at the measures that you use to basically make improvements. And maybe you identify 2 or 3 different measures, kind of like what we did in our survey that we sent out, that we can show different scenarios and even use illustrative examples of how that street, for example, could look like. And then you work with your stakeholder groups, you work with your actors, and especially your engagement with the public to get them involved, and so that they, in a sense, take ownership. Because at the end of the day, it means that if we end up taking space away from the cars, then people have to accept that. It's not necessarily just we have civil servants say, well, this is the way it's got to go, because we have no other options. The city is growing, it's expanding, people are traveling more and more, but people have to accept it and say, no, this is a better quality street design. This is the one that we want.
Thank you very much, and stay tuned.